Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Reloscope. My name is Lu, and I'm your humble host today. And I think if you're tuning into the show, you have probably listened to quite a few different topics about romantic relationships. Personally, I think that the thing that I struggle with the most when it comes to relationships is navigating the end of it. And I'm pretty sure this is quite unavoidable for most of us. I know some people find their high school sweetheart and they stay with them for the rest of their lives. And, it's a beautiful story that we often hear, but it's quite rare. For most of us, we deal with closure after it ends. And then we move on and we, look for another relationship and hope for the best. But you know what? Finding that closure is really hard. I can remember myself struggling with quite a few of those before. And I never had anyone to support me through that journey, So if you're tuning into this episode, I think that you're here to get some help, some support. Perhaps you're dealing with the end of a relationship and you're trying to find closure and acceptance. So that's what we're here to talk about. Finding closure and acceptance after a relationship ends. And to help us through this journey, we're joined by Sallyanne Hartnell, a divorce coach and strategist. A certified coach, she works with clients navigating challenging relationships, separation, and divorce through a unique, bespoke, personalized service where clients are holistically supported. Thanks so much for joining us today, Sallyanne.
Thanks for having me, Lou. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, well, I would definitely say that you have a very unique line of work dealing with things that people are terrified to talk about, right? And it's not necessarily something that we hear about every day, but you work with your own clients, and I'm pretty sure that you deal with this on a day-to-day basis. So I'm curious to learn more about your professional journey, because I'm sure that it's not random that you chose to do this. So why did you choose to do this?
Well, to be really honest, Lou, I think it chose me. So I navigated a significant separation, breakup, divorce from the father of my kids. My children are now 22 and 20, and we separated when they were very young, 6 and 4. And I moved through that separation and subsequent divorce I had a therapist, we had legal advice, we had financial advice, we had all that, but I didn't have somebody in my corner holding my hand, guiding me through. And I was really searching for that at the time. And then coming out of that separation divorce, which we navigated very amicably, we're still friendly, still friends, and able to share significant moments with our now young adult children together as a family, albeit a different sort of family. Other people started asking me how I did it. So those two things combined, my inability to find the support, the specialised support that I was looking for around navigating separation, breakup, divorce, and finding that closure, as well as other people asking me how I'd done it, led me to realise that there was a real gap in the market, so to speak. And so I retrained and launched Reflect Coaching to fill that gap. I have a professional background in health allied services. I was a physiotherapist for a number of years, so brought those scientific analytical skills into the space, as well as my training as a coach.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey. I'm sure that no matter how much time has passed, it's still hard to talk about, especially in it's such an open forum. And perhaps for you, it's a little bit easier compared to the average person because you've gone through the journey, and in fact, you're also helping your clients navigate through this. But still, this topic is something that I think is very important to talk about. You know, uh, it, I'm actually a child of divorce, and my parents never fully got over it, I think, because I still hear about it, and that's why I know, at least from personal experience, that it's very important to have someone to support you, and the work you do is really important to help people that are going through separation and divorce to navigate through it, and to not pass it on to the next generation, because oftentimes that's exactly what happens, and we don't want that. So we'll dive deeper into the topic in a little bit. And before we do that, we have a section called Have You Met Sallyanne? And we're going to get to know you a bit better through 5 things that you love and 5 things that you are inspired by. So, first of all, let's start with books. We love reading on this show. We love to hear about the books that our guests love. So, what is your favorite book, or maybe one of your favorite books?
Like lots of people who work in personal development space, I have a massive stack of unread self-help books on my bedside table. I mostly enjoy reading fiction, and something that I've read recently was Boy Swallows Universe by Trent Dalton, and it has probably leapfrogged a number of my previously favourite books. I do really love Alain de Botton's The Course of Love, and that sort of ties into our theme today. So when I was thinking about favourite books, I could go on and on and on about my favourite books, but those two came to mind.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. And Boy Swallows Universe now has a TV series on Netflix as well. For those who don't know, I love it. I'm still behind on catching up with the show, but yeah, I love the books as well. Thank you for sharing. So let's talk about films. What would be one of your favorite films of all time?
Of all time, I was going to say that just this week I've seen the film part 1 of Wicked, and it blew me away. So again, it's probably leapfrogged up through favourite films. I love the Star Wars movies. What else do I love? I love Love Actually, and I hate that I love Love Actually, but I really love it. And yes, I'm one of those people that's still really, really angry with Alan Rickman for doing what he did to Emma Thompson's character.
Well, thank you for sharing. Not just one favorite, but several favorites, and they're all great ones to talk about. I haven't watched the Wicked one yet, but yeah, we'll definitely have to do that since you're talking so highly of it. So you're our podcast guest of the day, and a fun fact about our shows is that some of our podcast guests actually don't listen to podcasts. So I wonder if you are a listener yourself.
I'm absolutely a listener, and I have, again, like so many favorites that I'm not loyal. One that comes to mind is The Imperfects. I think they're fantastic. They touch on subjects that other people perhaps don't. There's also one, Do You Effing Mind? I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on, and I can't remember the woman's name, but she talks about relationships, and brilliant. So they're my 2 favourites at the moment, but I bounce around. And of course, Glennon Doyle, We Can Do Hard Things, absolutely favourite.
Yeah, those are all great shows. Thank you for sharing. Next up, we would love to get to know about a person that you look up to the most, or maybe several people, actually.
Several people. Top of mind comes Brené Brown, Glennon Doyle, like amazing work on being a human in the world, relationships, connection. I'm going to say my mother, which sounds really, really a bit twee, but she's 84 and she has dementia and in aged care. And I've realised over the last 3 years that she was the glue that held our family together. And so I really admire the way she did that and the way she raised us. She also raised my sister and myself to do as I say, not as I do. She tried to break some of those intergenerational patterns, I suppose, not necessarily by the way what she did, but by what she told us and encouraged us to do.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I love when people talk about their moms, as someone they look up to. And, I think our moms are great, in their own ways. And, especially hearing about your mother, even with her dementia and, how old she is right now, to be that figure in your life it's a beautiful thing. So thanks for sharing that. And last but not least, we would love to know about a course that you've taken that has been the most influential in your life.
Very easy to say, the life coaching course that I undertook to become the coach that I am. It's an Australian-based course run by a woman, developed by a woman called Julie Parker. It's called the Beautiful You Coaching Academy, and it is full of fierce, feminine, amazing humans. It's an awesome ICF-accredited course with lots of trauma-informed training just woven through it, and not just a course, it's a community. So in fact, I was in an event last night, a marketing or connection event, and there are a number of other coaches, alumni, trainers from that course, and the power in the room from those connections was quite amazing. So hands down, the most life-changing course that I've ever undertaken.
Great. Thank you for sharing. And we can certainly see that in your work as well. So it's definitely rings true to the question, definitely the most influential. Now we've got to know you a bit better. Let's talk about today's topic. We are talking about finding closure and acceptance after a relationship ends. And to start with, let's talk about relationships. You mentioned yourself that this could be its own podcast, and I couldn't agree more. Yeah, there's just so much to talk about. But if we were to define relationship, especially romantic relationship in the context of today's conversation, how would you describe a relationship?
As you said, Lou, like it's such a massive topic that I think the best way to do that, the best way to define it is just to come down to the basics. And it's an intimate partnership between two people where they are building something together with a view to a future, whether that's next week, next month, next year. I think just keeping it really simple is the best way to define it. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. So two people in a partnership, a committed partnership, sharing life, hopefully dreams, values, hopes, on a pathway to a shared future.
Yeah, definitely. It's always comes down to the basic that we often forget about. I think we might have a wide range of audience members who are listening to this episode, and I think it kind of varies from stage to stage in life. But it all comes down to what you're saying, and sometimes we often forget that. I think it's also a matter of how the relationship came to be and which stage of life you are in, because I have found that oftentimes when friends talk about relationships, they struggle with the mismatch in what each person wants out of the relationship, and then the goal that you were saying, right? It could be next week, next month, next year. For some relationships it doesn't go to next year actually, which is unfortunate, but it's just reality of some relationships. And oftentimes we forget, like if we don't have next year, we still have next week, right? And I think it's a hard thing to navigate, especially in the modern society and modern world that we're in right now. So I'm curious to know more about your view on this, especially some of the misconceptions that you think people have when they think about romantic relationships.
Some of the misconceptions. I think you touched on it earlier in what you were just saying now. It's about expectation and stage of life. I was going to say age. It's not age, it's stage of life. So what is each person looking for when they come into this relationship, this connection, or have they just fallen into relationship? So yeah, I think expectation is huge. And when the expectations are mismatched, then the relationship is not doomed, but it perhaps isn't heading down the path that one wants. Your question was about expectation, right? No, I'm sorry. What was your question?
Misconceptions.
Misconceptions. Thank you. Yeah, I think misconceptions are born of a mismatch in expectation for each person coming into the relationship. I think another really big misconception is that our life partner, our intimate partner, our romantic partner can meet all of our needs as a human. That's a massive misconception. And I think I see it in my work insofar as it contributes to resentment, disappointment, which can then lead to a breakdown in relationships. So I think that's the biggest misconception that I would touch on, and that is that our partner should be able to meet every one of our needs as a human being, and that's just not realistic or possible.
That's a really good point. And I am curious about this because I think that some people, or actually most people, might struggle with this when it comes to managing expectations, and the way that we view relationship would be impacted by this, because, like you said, our romantic partner cannot meet all of our needs, and there's this. I think there's this struggle though when you think about it, there are certain needs that need to be met in the relationship, and then other needs we need to kind of find other outlets and find other people like friends, family to kind of help us with that. So today's topic is about separation and divorce. And so when do we know that this is the end? When do we know that the needs that we actually have, like the must have for our needs, are not met, and we know that it's time to let go?
That's when when your must-have, non-negotiable, drop-dead non-negotiable needs are not being met, or your personal values have been diminished, let go of, or your boundaries repeatedly overstepped. That's when you know. For women, for female identifying people, we stay in relationships for an average, and I can't find where this statistic was generated from, but I've heard it a number of times, stay on average questioning a relationship for 7 years. Now, that, of course, is probably an age demographic, towards the older age demographic, but that's a really, really long time to be questioning a relationship. So what I often find is clients come to me, they already know. Even though they say, I don't know, I'm questioning, should I stay, should I go? If you're really strongly questioning that, you already know. So I'll go back to what I originally said. It's about boundaries being repeatedly disrespected by a partner, or core values not being aligned, or core basic needs not being met. And sometimes it doesn't mean that that other person is wrong or bad. It is just that they don't have capacity to meet you in that, or to love you in the way that you want to be loved.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a hard thing to navigate though, because I know that we just talked about, like, the basic needs, and we'll know when they're compromised. But then oftentimes I feel like there's this struggle where we're like, oh, this is such a small thing, does it matter? Right? And then we look back on it and we're like, oh, it actually really mattered, I just didn't see it. And only with hindsight do we realize it. So I think the finding closure part is where we actually reflect on what was not met, right? And I find that is the case, at least for me personally, and for my friends. When we talk about the end of a relationship, we only realize with hindsight, because some relationships that ended went on, like you said, like an average of 7 years, right? It's a long time. But some other relationships went on for a much longer time. I've heard stories about relationships that went on for 10 years, and then they finally broke it off and they found the right person, and they just got married within the next year after that. So there's just so much to navigate through the end of a relationship. And so I would love to know, from your perspective, what would closure mean in this scenario? How do you define finding closure? When do we know that we have got it?
I don't think you ever know you've got it. I think it's a self-discovery, learning about who we are and what we need in an intimate partner relationship is an ongoing process because we're evolving as humans. Going back to the ending of a relationship, Lu, you said it yourself, it's about reflection. It's about looking back. And it's really, it can be really tempting to finger point, lay blame, to externalize and make it all about other. Now, I'm not by any means discounting the impact that another person can have on us in a relationship. And here I want to ensure that listeners know I'm not talking about abusive relationships here. That's a whole other story. What we're talking about is a healthy relationship that has run its course and ended. So it's really tempting to externalize it and lay blame at the other person's feet. They did this, they didn't do this, they didn't meet this need. And it's a real invitation to pause and to look at ourselves and think, what was my contribution here? How did I show up in that relationship that enabled X, Y, or Z to happen? What was my role? Did I step over my own knowing, which you just described? That's just a little thing. I won't worry about that. I'll let it go. And how did I communicate when things got hard, when things were challenging, when conflict rose up? How did I handle that? So closure comes, I think, from an internal process. Closure doesn't come from constantly texting or ringing your ex-partner to say, I just want to have a conversation, I need closure. You're actually not going to get it from the person who you're in a relationship from. You're going to create it for yourself. You're going to create it by reflecting on, how did I show up in that relationship and what am I going to do differently when I'm in another relationship with another human? What do I need to shift, change? How do I need to grow? What do I need to do to communicate more clearly, to really openly communicate my needs and to move through conflict in really healthy ways? Because let's face it, if you could do that, you'd probably still be in a relationship with that person, right? So closure is an internal process and you sort of know it, you know you're there, or you know you're on the way to being there when that person is not dominating your thoughts. You're not constantly looking for them or looking at them, and you're not constantly unpicking and unraveling and digging through the mud of the relationship, if you know what I mean. You're actually able to look forward and think about, okay, what's next here?
Yeah, definitely. And another thing that I think would be very helpful here as well, at least from my own experience, is kind of knowing your attachment styles and knowing the other person's attachment style, because that, like, it shows a lot in the last stage of the relationship, especially when you're trying to find that closure and acceptance. And when you were talking about, if closure being finding closure being an internal process, I was like, yes, that makes so much sense, because I remember in my early 20s I was in this very short-lived relationship, and I was talking to my friend about it because this person broke up with me and very suddenly out of nowhere, saying that, you're so great, but I'm not ready for a relationship. And that was it. And I told my friend, I just really want to have a conversation with him, but he's not giving me that access. And then my friend said, closure? What closure do you need? He gave you plenty. And then I thought,
he closed the door in your face, Lou. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. And then I thought, what do you mean he gave me plenty? I still need to have a conversation. And that was like way before I knew about attachment styles, way before I knew about how to deal with it from my end, because I'm the kind of person that wants to talk it out like straight away. Like, I need to know what happened. But now I've learned that more than half of the world is not like that. They don't want to talk about it when it ends. And funny thing is, this person came back into my life a year later wanting to talk to me So that was very funny. But yeah, I then found closure on my own, didn't have to have the conversation. It was a hard learning curve. But I think for a lot of people, if they're listening to this podcast episode, it might mean that they are probably like me back in the day. They didn't know how to look for that closure within themselves. It is a hard thing to do, to be honest, because I struggled hard with it for a long
It's
time.
it's very hard. So seeking support through listening to podcasts, working with a coach, working with a therapist can be really, really useful and helpful, because we don't know what we don't know, right? You don't know if you don't yet know about attachment theory and you don't know what yours is, maybe this is an opportunity to explore that. There are, when you were talking then, Lou, I was just like, there's the leaver and the leavee often in a relationship, right?
Yeah.
And, that person in your life just left, didn't want to talk about it. That's their closure. That's the way they gain closure. Walk away, don't talk about it, don't unpack it, don't unravel it. And we don't know what that person did in their own private space afterwards. Then there's the other person who ruminates, unpacks it all, picks everything out and analyzes it. What happened? How am I here? What does this mean? So there are lots of different ways of creating closure, but they're two common ways. Like, I don't need closure. I'm just going to walk away over here and look for the next thing and often jump into the next relationship. I don't need to do any work. I just shut the door. And then the other person that really digs deeply, unpicks it all, unravels it, looks at it, and then comes action, right? It can unravel it and look at it, but then you've got to do something about it. That's when listening to podcasts, reading books, going to a therapist, working with a coach can be really useful to shine a light on what you can't see and what you might need to heal, shift, or change, so that you can not just leap over and shut the door and have closure. You can move through and have closure create growth that then leads to closure.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It's very much a self growth journey here, rather than, working it through with the other person. Because oftentimes when we think about finding closure, it sounds like we need to find closure with the person that we parted ways with. But in fact, it's very much just finding out what it is within us that, we can use and what we can learn from that experience to grow. And I think it's a very hard thing to do, but also a very beautiful thing once we've got through it. And in the process, obviously, it's very hard. You're not gonna be able to like smile or like feel happy or light about it. If you do feel like that way, I think that something is wrong. Perhaps like there's probably not that real feeling in the relationship. Perhaps.
Perhaps if you're feeling happy and light and relief
Yeah.
after a breakup, then it tells you something about that relationship.
Yeah.
Having said that, both can be true, right? You
Yeah.
can be really sad and grieving the relationship, grieving the future you thought or you imagined that you might have with this person, and also relief, lightness. Because if the relationship is challenging, let's just stick with challenging, shall we? If the relationship is challenging, unhealthy, unhappy, there is often a sense of relief. I don't have to continue to fight for that relationship. I don't have to continue to fight for my needs to be met, to have the hard conversations. That part is done. So there's relief and also grief and sadness and heartbreak, and the two can coexist.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's again going right back to the reflection piece. You will see what went right, and you'll also see what went wrong. And sometimes it's about learning about what we don't want from a relationship after that experience. And I think it's really powerful. So, I think that's one very small part of, how this whole journey of finding closure and acceptance can impact the way we view relationships. And I would love to know from your experience as well, and from what you've seen from yourself and working with your clients, once you have found that closure, once you've got that self-growth journey, you move on to the next relationship, or, some people just choose to, stay still and, like, this is it. I'm done with relationships. It can go either way. I've seen many cases. So what would be the impact of that process on the way that we view relationships, romantic relationships particularly?
I said earlier that, closure and growth into relationship or in the relationship space is lifelong. And I really believe that. So I don't think you just sort of snap it closed and, okay, next one. You create closure and come to a position of acceptance that, okay, that relationship was X, Y, Z. I learned A, B, and C. I'm going to take that with me. And these are the things I'm not going to take with me. So I think it's about sort of integrating that and then consciously choosing what you're going to take forward and what you're going to let go. Does that answer your question? I'm not quite sure that I've answered your question.
Yeah, I think partly. And then, the other piece that I'm curious about is because there are so many people that we're talking about, and each person deals with it differently. Some people, once they have found closure, perhaps they learn and grow from it, and they have the strength to continue on and find a better relationship, right? But then for others, they might get they found closure, but then they're in that stage where they're like, oh, I'm done with relationships. And I'm saying this from experience, from my own personal observation, from how I react after a relationship ends, and I've found, quote unquote, that closure. And I also know from the people in my life, some move on and find beautiful relationships, and some just don't. So the impact of this whole process is massive. In the next stage of for the next relationships. So how is this playing out in other people, especially with the clients you work with?
I see both. I see both moving on. Okay, I'm going to take one step back and say I see three common patterns. One is bang, straight into the next relationship. And if a client's working with me, I'm trying to put the brakes on, saying, let's come back to where you are and work through the ending of the previous one before you jump into the next one. So I don't necessarily talk about closure. I talk about learning and growth and conscious choice. What are you consciously choosing to leave behind? What are you consciously choosing to create next? So the ones that jump straight in, the ones that do the work, go through the process, go through the motions, and do what I call define the container. So define the container that a future relationship is going to sit in. Your values, your relationship values, your personal values, your drop dead non-negotiables, what is off the table for you, your commitment to yourself, how you're going to show up in a relationship, how you're going to communicate, how you're going to handle and resolve conflict. So doing the work, and then the others are just like, I'm done here. When I'm working with the I'm done here clients, I take them through a process to ensure that they're actually consciously choosing I'm done here, not doing it as a form of defense or blocking. Because as humans, we are hardwired for connection, right? That doesn't mean that every single one of us needs to be in a one-on-one intimate partner relationship that lasts forever. That's not reality, and that's not what everybody wants, particularly in 2024, right? But I want my clients and anybody listening, if they're in the hard no, I'm done with relationships, to really go deep and say, am I done? Or am I just hurt? And is my inner child wounded? Is my ego wounded? And I'm blocking any future possibility for being re-wounded, because to go back into another relationship would require me to open myself up, to be vulnerable, and therefore open myself up to being hurt.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really great to hear from your experience, because we know that however we behave after the end of the relationship, we're not alone, because we probably would fall into one of those three categories that you just talked about. And it's very important to know when to do what. And, the rushing straight into dating and, finding a new relationship is something that I've seen way too often. And it's hard for a friend to say to that person, hey, don't do that. I think you should be reflecting on your current relationship. It only works if they're consciously choosing to work with somebody like yourself, right? A coach, someone who has the expertise, who can guide them through the process, and they truly want to be helped. I think if they're listening to our podcast episode today, then they probably do want to be helped. So for our listeners who would like to get some support through this journey, they are probably, maybe they are at the stage where they identify that, okay, my relationship is ending and I'm preparing for the end of it, or somebody is already going through the process of a separation or even divorce and they're listening to this conversation. What would be your final piece of advice to them to navigate through this whole thing?
My advice is always to pause and to go slowly. And I work with clients right from their 20s through to their, goodness, I've had a client in her 70s. So a lot of, and I'm going to clarify because it informs the way I answer this question. A lot of my clients have children, the parents. So there are other people impacted by the decision. So I'm sort of answering from that lens. And I would say to anybody particularly in that situation where there's shared property, there's children, there's a dog or a fur baby that you need to consider, go slowly and start gently. Gottman Institute, Gottman Training, and I'm Gottman trained, they talk about a slow startup for having hard conversations. And so I always apply that to starting a separation, a breakup, or a divorce. Go slowly, go kindly and compassionately, because the way you start it informs the way it progresses. So if you're married with 2 young kids, a dog, and a mortgage, and you walk in after work one night and just say, I'm done, I'm out of here, see you later, I've hired a lawyer and you'll be hearing from them, that informs the process, right? But if you, in that scenario, open a conversation with your partner about the challenges, about wanting to end the relationship, about the ways that can be done with kindness and compassion, you are more likely to roll gently down a more collaborative, compassionate pathway towards separation. So extrapolating that across all relationships, when you're navigating or you want to begin the breakup, do it with kindness, compassion, gently and calmly. It's not always the case, right? It can be that final straw. There's a big argument, and I've been there too. Really big argument, and you're just like, bang, that's it. I'm done here. Even in that situation, even in that circumstance, you can still wind it back, dial it back, and rather than just exploding at the other person and saying, absolutely done here, get out, I'm leaving, whatever, you can say, look, obviously this is not working. This latest argument is an indication that something needs to shift and change. And you can do it with kindness and compassion. And the kindness and compassion needs to really be extended to yourself as much as, perhaps more than, for the other person. So my biggest tip is do it gently, do it kindly, and do it with the most self-compassion that you can.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really great advice, especially since a lot of people wants to rush through the process. Like I told you about my personal experience, right? I just wanted to find that closure quick, want to talk it out with this person and just want to smash it out as if it's like a project with a deadline and I know what exactly to do.
And you can do that. You can absolutely do that. But you need to find your person to do that with. And it's often most often it's not the person that you're breaking up with. It's someone else. It's a trusted friend who will hold up the mirror and call you out on your BS. They will listen to you and they will reflect back to you, but they won't spiral down with you into that. He did, she did, they said,
Yeah.
And if it's not a trusted friend, then obviously a coach or a therapist.
Yes, I was going to say a coach or a therapist like yourself, right? To guide them through the process, especially when, I find that it's really important to have a coach because, you want to share with your friends, but you also don't want to talk about that as the only thing you talk about. And I found myself doing that quite a bit, when I was younger. And then I realized that my friends are great. They will support me, but I'm talking about this way too much to them. And I should find another outlet.
Your friends are also not objective.
Yeah.
They bring in all of their own stories, all of their own conditioning, all of their own judgment, and probably their fierce protectiveness of you. And so they can't be objective. They can listen and with you. They're also not trained. So they're not trained to take what you say, to ask you the next question, to deepen your personal understanding of what's going on for you. And then in my work, what I do is switch to a future focus. I always start at the end. Okay, Lu, you're going through this rugged breakup, separation, divorce. I know it's really hard and it's heartbreaking right now. And I want you to switch your lens to 5 years' time, 10 years' time. What does life look like and feel like for Lu then? Let's define that. Okay, now come back to where you are. What choice, decision, action do you need to take right now today to step you one tiny bit closer to that vision that you have for yourself? Is it ringing him up or her up and blasting down the telephone? Is that the way you're going to seek closure, or is there another option? So your friends are great and they're not trained to take you to that future point.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think that's a really great advice. We've covered quite a bit of theory and, theoretical things that can or might happen here. But now let's get a bit more practical for our audience. We've got this section called Habits and Practices. And we would love to know from your perspective, just one thing that our listener can take home today, something that you personally do yourself that helps you to find that closure, to cultivate that acceptance when a relationship ends so that you can move on with your life and, find that growth that we were talking about. What could be the one simple thing our listeners can try?
Sorry. Can I have 2, Lu?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. The first thing is journal. Journal. Write it out. Get it out of your head and onto a piece of paper. You can read it back if you like. You can write it out and ritually burn it in a fire pit if you like. But the process of getting your thoughts, your feelings, all of that out of your head and out of your body is really powerful. It can help you process things. And I would just encourage, if you're not a journaler, you've never done it before, just set a time. And I was going to say 5 minutes, but for someone who's never journaled, 5 minutes a day is a long time. So start with a minute. Just sit there and write anything and everything that comes up. It's a really good way to create closure too, if you write all of the things that you really want to say to that person, all of those horrible, nasty, heartbroken messages that you want to send to them, just write it out. Journaling is an amazing way for us as humans to process thoughts, feelings, emotions, and to move them out of our body. The other strategy or technique that I love to use personally, and I also encourage my clients to use, is it's a somatic practice, and I'm not somatically trained, but I build some somatics into my work, to get barefoot on the earth, on the beach, wherever you live. Get barefoot and just breathe. Be in the moment, feel the earth under your feet, ground into the earth and just breathe. And again, it can be, I'm just going to stand here for 10 deep breaths with my eyes closed. It sounds very basic, but what it does is it brings us back to ourselves. So breathing, feeling the earth underneath your feet, and just focusing on what you're feeling in your body, what's coming up for you. It can be really informative. We're awesome as human beings at pushing it all down. Nothing to see here, not feeling, just busy, getting through my life, going to work, going to uni, driving to visit friends, going out for dinner, watching Netflix, and running around after my kids and walking the dog. Nothing to see. I'm not processing anything. It's going to come up at some point and bite you. So writing it out, getting it out of your body, and standing feet on the earth, breathing and allowing yourself to feel, they're probably two of my favourite processing practices.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. You've covered quite a bit there in terms of what our listeners can do and things that they can try, even, because for some people, it's very easy to journal every day. For others, they've never done it before, right? So I think it's just a matter of trying it first and see where you go with that. And certainly, you explore something in the process. And that's the most important thing.
I think it's also making a commitment to yourself that I'm going to do this one thing and I'm going to do it every day for a really short period of time if that's all you can manage. But I'm going to do it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. I'm going to commit to the practice because just doing it once, you're just like, oh, that doesn't work. What's she talking about? It's a process and it's a learning process. You might start journaling for 1 minute, 3 weeks' time, you realize you've sat there for 15 minutes. Same with breathing or grounding or a simple breathing technique that you can find and use and develop. You might do it today. It's like, that does not work. But it's the committing to the process and building on that over time that is what works.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And hopefully, our audience would benefit from, committing to these practices in the journey of finding closure, of getting that acceptance that they are looking for. Obviously, as we've talked about, I think we're just scratching the surface because you mentioned that there's so many different types of relationships and many types of endings here, especially, for some, it's merely a romantic relationship with nobody else involved or influenced, but for others, they've got kids, they've got properties, they've got so many things to deal with, and it's not going to be something that applies to all, but at least I think the practice would help, no matter where or what exactly they're going through. So it's a great start. And next up, we've got open mic. And this is a great platform for you to share anything you're passionate about sharing with our audience, perhaps a bit more on today's topic or even about something else that you would like to share. So take it away, Sallyanne.
I'm passionate about anybody navigating a breakup, a separation, divorce, particularly where it is, I was going to say particularly where it's complicated with other things. No, just blanket. Anyone navigating a separation, a breakup, divorce, being fully holistically supported. It's why I set my business up in the first place. It can be a really lonely time, isolating time. And particularly we're recording at the tail end of November. I don't know when this will land, but we're heading into the holiday season as you and I are sharing this conversation, and it can be a really lonely time if you're separated, divorced, navigating a breakup. It can be really hard. So one thing I'm passionate about is anybody building their support network, scaffolding themselves as they do this hard thing, which is breakup, healing, processing, coming to closure and acceptance. And of course, I'm going to say work with a coach, but I also think it's really important to build your team around you, paid and unpaid, and to be really selective about that team. Consciously choose who gets to be in that inner circle. Because your mum might be great, and I said I look up to my mum. Your mum might be great, but she's not objective, and she might see, our mums can be our harshest critics too, right? So she might be great, but she's not objective. Your best friend, you probably need her or him in there. You also need a few other people in there. So be conscious about who gets to be a part of your breakup crew, your support crew. And from a business perspective, that's why I do what I do, because I don't want anybody to navigate this. And I work particularly in the separation and divorce space, where clients are working through family law, the family law system, be it in Australia or Canada or the UK or the States. And that's another layer of complexity on managing, navigating, healing, processing a breakup, a divorce. It's really a difficult system to navigate, and one that hopefully you never have to. And if you do it, you only have to ever do it once. So build your support team, build your network. And as part of that, of course, I'd love to be your support person. So open mic, that's what I'm passionate about. Nobody doing this by themselves. There's loads of free resources on my website, and I know that we'll link that in the show notes. What else am I passionate about? I'm passionate personally about travel, expansion, and connection with other humans. And again, that's why I set up my business the way I did. I work purely online so that I can travel, expand, and connect with other humans while I'm still working. I also have a podcast, Lu. Again, I'm sure we'll link that in the show notes. So for anybody who is navigating this specific space of breakup, separation, divorce, there's lots of access to resources and support via my podcast. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you. And for our audience who doesn't know, what is your podcast called?
It's called Reflect, Reclaim, and Liberate.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
So it really steps clients through that process of what we've been talking about today, right? Closure and acceptance. It's about reflecting. It's about reclaiming parts of you that perhaps you let go of in that relationship, or that you would like to build into the future for yourself. And it's about liberating you to consciously choose what's next, whether that is a single solitary life or a new consciously created relationship with another human.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And I was just going to ask you if our audience would like to reach out to work with you, to follow your work, or simply just get to know the resources, listen to your podcast. Where should they go?
You can find me on Instagram at Reflect Coaching, or my website is www.reflectcoaching.com.au. Also, a really easy way is to search my name, Sallyanne Hartnell. There aren't very many of us in the world, and so I tend to pop up at the top of your Google search if you search my name.
Great. Thank you. And thanks so much for joining us today. Hopefully we'll have you back some other time to dive deeper into some aspects of the topic.
Thanks so much, Lu. It's been wonderful to chat.
You've been listening to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at re.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.